welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on the control center for movement, sensation, and all those rapid reflexes, the spinal cord.
It's an absolutely essential structure.
It really is. And for our listener today, we are going to be extracting the most important functional and anatomical insights from Chapter 14 of Human Anatomy.
And that's a vital piece of the puzzle. You know, when people think of the central nervous system, they almost always jump straight to the brain.
Right.
But the spinal cord is its own, very sophisticated processor.
So our mission here is to really define its structure, understand how it's protected, and most importantly, grasp the integrative activities it handles all on its own.
All without needing to crack open a textbook.
Exactly. And that dual function is probably the core concept we need to establish right away. This cord is not just some passive cable.
Not at all. It's a processor. It functions as a super fast information highway to the brain, yes, but it also has its own local computing power to process and integrate information.
Which is key for our reflexes.
Absolutely key. And to really understand that power, we have to start with the physical structure, the way it's actually built.
Okay, let's unpack this. Where do we start? The geography of the cord itself.
Let's do it. In an adult, the spinal cord is relatively short. It's only about 45 centimeters or 18 inches long.
And it starts right at the base of the skull.
Exactly, at the foramen magnum. But here's the thing. It only extends down to the inferior border of the first lumbar vertebra, L1.
That's fascinating. So it doesn't even run the full length of the vertebral column. Now, if we were looking at its surface, what are the major landmarks?
You'd see two main longitudinal grooves. On the back, the dorsal surface, there's a shallow dent called the posterior median sulcus.
Okay.
And on the front, the ventral surface, there's a much deeper indentation, almost like a crease, called the anterior median fissure.
And those basically divided into left and right halves.
They do.
Now, structurally, the cord isn't just a uniform pipe, right? It widens in a couple of places. Why the enlargements?
Well, that widening tells you exactly where the system is doing the heavy lifting.
Where the power draw is greatest.
Exactly. The cervical enlargement is there because it needs a huge amount of extra wiring to supply the pectoral girdle and the upper limbs. Think about all the fine motor control in your hands.
Right, that makes sense.
And then lower down, the lumbosacral enlargement handles everything for the pelvis and the lower limbs. It's another huge concentration of neural tissue.
Okay, so below that lumbosacral enlargement, the cord tapers off.
It does. It tapers to a conical tip called the conus medullaris. And from that cone, a very slender fibrous strand extends down to the coccyx.
And that's the filum terminale.
Yes. And it's critical because it provides longitudinal support. It's like an anchor.
A structural necessity. So we talk about 31 segments, and each one is defined by a pair of spinal nerves.
That's right. And each segment has a dorsal root ganglion, which is just a cluster containing the cell bodies of all the incoming sensory neurons.
So information arrives via the dorsal roots, and the response, the motor command, goes out via the ventral roots.
Yes, carrying the axons of motor neurons, both for conscious movement, which is somatic, and involuntary actions, which are visceral.
And here's a really crucial point. These sensory and motor fibers unite just outside the ganglion to form one structure.
The single spinal nerve.
Wow.
And this is why every single spinal nerve is classified as a mixed nerve. It's carrying information both ways.
So both sensory and motor, afferent and efferent.
Precisely.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier that the cord actually stops growing around age 4, but the bony vertebral column keeps getting longer. That must have a pretty dramatic effect on the roots below L1.
Oh, it absolutely does. Because the spinal cord ends so high up, the dorsal and ventral roots for the lumbar and sacral segments have to stretch way down to exit at their correct spots.
So they're trailing.
They're trailing, and when early anatomists saw this complex of long roots below the conus medullaris, they gave it this really evocative name, the cauda equina.
The horse's tail.
The horse's tail.
That image really sticks. Okay, now that we have the neural tissue itself, let's talk about its armor. The three membranes that provide protection and shock absorption. The spinal meninges.
Think of them as three nested layers of high-grade bubble wrap.
All right, starting with the outermost layer, the duramater, the tough mother.
It is the toughest layer, made of dense connective tissue. But here's a key distinction from the drain.
Okay.
In the spine, the duramater is separated from the bone of the vertebral canal by a literal cushion of space. That's the epidural space.
And that space is filled with fat and blood vessels. And it's our first point of clinical relevance, which I'm sure we'll come back to.
We will. Moving inward, you hit the middle layer, the arachnoid mater.
Okay.
It's a simple squamous epithelium. Now, while there's a potential space, the subdural space, in life, the dura and arachnoid are probably in direct contact. The real action happens beneath the arachnoid.
Right, in the subarachnoid space. This is the absolute lifeline, isn't it?
It really is, because this space is filled with cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF,
And that's the primary shock absorber.
shock absorber, and it's also the diffusion medium for gases, nutrients, waste, everything the neural tissue needs.
And the innermost layer.
The most delicate, the pia mater, the delicate mother. This layer is basically shrink-wrapped to the spinal cord itself, following every single contour.
It's where the blood supply is.
Exactly. And to keep the cord from, sloshing around, the pia mater sends out these lateral anchors. They're called the denticulate ligaments.
Yeah, and they bind everything to the dura, preventing side-to-side movement.
Mm-hmm. They keep it stable.
Okay, that gives us a really clear picture of the armored pathway. So let's apply this clinically. You mentioned the epidural space and the subarachnoid space.
Mm-hmm.
How does knowing the anatomy of the cauda equina make something like a spinal tap safe?
It's entirely dependent on that L1 boundary. Remember, the spinal cord proper, the conus medullaris, ends around L1 or L2. So below that point, all you have are the tough roots of the cauda equina floating in that pool of CSF. So inserting a needle below L2, usually between L3 and L4, lets you safely collect CSF from the subarachnoid space without risking damage to the cord itself.
And that's a lumbar puncture.
That's a lumbar puncture.
Okay, so if the lumbar puncture accesses the CSF inside the subarachnoid space, an epidural block must be different. The anesthetic is placed outside all those layers.
Precisely. In an epidural, the anesthetic goes into the epidural space, that cushion of fat outside the duramater.
So it never even enters the meninges.
Exactly. So it mainly affects the spinal nerves in that localized area as they exit the canal. It provides targeted sensory anesthesia, often leaving the core spinal cord function untouched.
That is a perfect illustration of how critical these boundaries are. All right, let's move inward, past the armor, and look at the functional organization of the neural tissue, the gray and white matter.
Okay, so if you look at a cross-section, the geography is immediately obvious. The center is shaped like like an H or a butterfly.
And that's the gray matter.
That's the gray matter, full of neuron cell bodies and glial cells. Surrounding that H is the white matter, which is all the axons, mostly myelinated.
And in that gray matter, the neurons are organized into functional groups called nuclei. So what are the three key horns we need to know?
So we map function to location. The posterior, or dorsal, gray horns contain the sensory nuclei. This is the inbox where all the incoming information is processed.
Okay, input is dorsal.
Then you have the anterior, or ventral, gray horns. These contain the somatic motor neurons. These are the big drivers for your skeletal muscles.
So movement commands are ventral.
Right. And the third horn is only present in a specific area. The lateral gray horns appear only between segments T1 and L2.
And these are for the autonomic nervous system.
Exactly. They contain the visceral motor neurons controlling your smooth muscles, glands, and organs.
So input arrives dorsally, movement commands exit ventrally, and autonomic control is centered laterally.
You've got it. And then surrounding all of that is the white matter, organized into columns, or funiculi.
And the traffic in those columns travels in bundles called tracts.
Yes. And this is a vital functional distinction. Ascending tracts are the upward route, carrying sensory information toward the brain.
And descending tracts are the downward route, carrying motor commands from the brain into the spinal cord.
And they're strictly segregated by function and direction.
Which is why a severe spinal cord injury is so devastating.
It is. A sudden, severe impact can cause what's called spinal shock. A temporary, total loss of all sensory, motor, and reflexive function below the injury.
And the location of the trauma is everything. I mean, damage at the thoracic level leads to paraplegia.
Right, motor loss in the lower limbs, but damage in the high cervical area is profoundly more dangerous.
Absolutely. Damage up at, say, C4 or C5 can lead to quadriplegia, paralyzing all four limbs.
And even more critically, the segments from C3 to C5 supply the phrenic nerve. Damage there can directly affect the major respiratory muscles.
Potentially requiring assisted ventilation. That context makes the anatomy intensely important. Okay, let's shift to the 31 pairs of spinal nerves as they fan out.
Right. We have 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 costogule.
We have to address that quirky numbering in the neck.
Ah, yes. The reason we have 8 cervical nerves, but only 7 cervical vertebrae, is because C1 exits above the C1 vertebra.
So they're named for the vertebra that follows them.
For a while, yes, until you hit C8, which is between C7 and T1. After that, the nerve is named for the vertebra that precedes it.
A good trick to remember. Now, these peripheral nerves themselves are also highly protected.
Oh yeah, layering for protection is key. Outermost, you have the thick epineurium.
Okay.
Inside that, the perineurium wraps axons into bundles called fascicles. And this layer is crucial because it forms the blood-nerve barrier, protecting the axons from toxins.
And then the innermost layer, the endoneurium, surrounds each individual axon.
Once the nerve is formed, it immediately splits into several functional branches, or rami,
Every spinal nerve has a dorsal ramus,
which goes to the deep muscles and skin of the back,
and a ventral ramus.
which supplies the ventrolateral body surface, the body wall, and the limbs.
But some segments, T1 through L2, have specialized branches for the autonomic system, the rami communicantes.
Right, and this can be a bit complex, but think of it functionally. The white ramus carries the fast, myelinated signal away from the cord.
The on-ramp.
Exactly, and the gray ramus carries the slower, unmyelinated signal back to the spinal nerve for local delivery to glands and smooth muscle.
The local service road.
Perfect analogy.
And all of this sensory input is mapped on the skin by dermatomes.
Yes, a dermatome is a specific area of skin monitored by a single pair of spinal nerves.
So if someone loses sensation in a specific band-like area, it can tell the physician exactly which spinal nerve is compromised.
It's a vital diagnostic tool. But mapping the limbs gets more complicated, which leads us to the plexuses.
Right. Why do we need these dense interwoven networks? Why don't the ventral rami just run straight out?
It's because during embryonic development, a lot of small muscles fuse together to form our large, complex adult muscles, especially in the limbs.
So the plexus ensures that one big muscle gets input from multiple spinal cord segments.
Exactly. It provides redundancy and allows for highly coordinated movement.
Okay, we have 4 major ones. Let's start with the one that literally keeps us alive, the cervical plexus, C1 to C5.
This one supplies the neck, chest, and head, but its most important nerve by far is the phrenic nerve.
From C3, C4, and C5?
Right. It provides all motor and sensory innervation to the diaphragm. Remember what we said about high cervical injury? Severing the phrenic nerve means breathing stops.
Instantly life-threatening.
Then we have the most intricate one, the brachial plexus, for the upper limb.
It is incredibly complex. It's this whole weave of roots, trunks, divisions, and cords.
And the main takeaway is that this weave ultimately gives rise to the major nerves we know, like the radial, median, and ulnar nerves that give our hands such amazing control.
Exactly. And then you have the lumbar and sacral plexuses, which supply the lower limb.
Often grouped together.
As the lumbosacral plexus. And here, the absolute giant is the sciatic nerve, the longest and largest single nerve in the body. And the fact that this incredible wiring exists, yet can be so easily disrupted, is why we feel things like paresthesia, right? The pins and needles sensation.
Yeah, that's just a mild temporary neuropathy from compression. But sometimes that compression is chronic and severe, leading to specific palsies.
Like radial nerve palsy.
Sometimes called Saturday night palsy, from pressure on the radial nerve paralyzing the wrist and finger extensors.
Or ulnar palsy, from hitting your funny bone area too much.
Right, which causes loss of sensation in the ring and little fingers. And of course, the most common is probably carpal tunnel syndrome from compression of the median nerve at the wrist.
And for the lower body, the book mentions sciatica.
Yes, where compression of that massive sciatic nerve, sometimes from a distorted lumbar disc, or even something as simple as carrying a large wallet in a hip pocket, causes pain and numbness all the way down the back of the leg.
It's a perfect relatable example. Okay, finally, let's look at the foundational mechanism of automatic movement, neural reflexes.
A reflex is an immediate, involuntary motor response to a specific stimulus. Think speed, not thought. The path it travels is the reflex arc.
Okay, let's walk through the 5 mandatory steps.
First, the stimulus arrives and activates a receptor. Second, that information is relayed to the CNS by a sensory neuron through the dorsal route.
Third, processing happens in the gray matter.
Yes, this might be a simple direct synapse, or it could involve interneurons. Fourth, a motor neuron is activated, sending the response out via the ventral route.
And fifth, the response is carried out by the effector, a muscle or a gland.
Right. We classify them by complexity. The absolute fastest are monosynaptic reflexes.
Just one synapse.
Just one. The classic example is the stretch reflex, like the familiar patellar reflex, the knee jerk.
And if the response needs more coordination, it becomes a polysynaptic reflex.
Right. It involves at least one interneuron, so there's a slightly longer delay, but it allows for much more complex responses, like pulling your foot away from pain while simultaneously shifting your weight to stay balanced.
And it's critical to realize that while these are automatic, they're not unbreakable.
Not at all. Higher centers in the brain, using those descending tracks, are constantly modulating or even overriding these reflexive patterns when we need them to.
So to recap, we've mapped this highly protected, segmented pathway, the spinal cord. We saw how its anatomical boundaries allow for precise clinical access, a spinal tap for diagnostics and epidural for pain management.
Hmm.
We discussed the functional geography of its gray matter input dorsal, output ventral, and how its 31 mixed nerves organize into these incredibly redundant plexuses to drive complex movements in our limbs.
I think the profound takeaway is just the precision and the dual nature of this structure. It's a communication line for sure, but it's also a rapid processor generating critical life-sustaining responses instantly.
Right.
And understanding that precise relationship between a specific skin region, a dermatome, and the single nerve that monitors it, or knowing exactly why damage at C4 affects breathing while damage at L4 results in only lower limb paralysis. That's the ultimate clinical insight into this whole system.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. Thank you for diving into the functional anatomy and integrative activities of this vital part of the CNS.
My pleasure.
And thank you, our listener, for submitting this source material for today's deep dive. We hope this breakdown of the spinal cord and spinal nerves provides the comprehensive clarity you need to master this complex topic.
We'll catch you next time.